Elena Carter had a plan. It wasn't grand or glamorous, but it was hers. She wanted to wear the white coat, to heal, to help, to stand beside a hospital bed and whisper, "You're going to be okay." That was the life she dreamed of, simple but full of purpose. At 25, Elena was a top student in a Brooklyn nursing program. She had gentle hands, a calming voice, and a mind that soaked up medical textbooks like sunlight. But life doesn't care about your plans. It was a Tuesday morning when everything collapsed. Her father, strong, steady, the anchor of their little family, collapsed in the kitchen. One stroke, one fall, and then nothing. No goodbyes, no second chances. The funeral was quiet. Her mother stopped speaking. Her little brother, just 17, stared at walls instead of books. And Elena folded her dream into a drawer along with her stethoscope and study notes. She didn't cry, she didn't scream, she went to work. Tables needed bussing, floors needed scrubbing, groceries didn't buy themselves. Medication cost more than hope. And so when a neighbor whispered about a nanny job for a wealthy family, Elena didn't ask questions. She said, "When do I start?" She wasn't walking into her dream anymore. She was walking into survival. Ethan Blake was the kind of man people admired and feared. CEO of a top architectural firm in Manhattan, he designed towers that kissed the sky and built walls even higher around his heart. To the world, he had it all. The corner office, the penthouse view, the six-figure suits. But none of that could bring back Anna. She died on a rainy Thursday afternoon. A car accident. Too fast, too sudden, too cruel. And just like that, the color drained from his world. His 4-year-old daughter, Sophie, stopped speaking, stopped walking, stopped being a child. As if the light inside her had flickered out the moment her mother left this world. Doctors called it psychological paralysis. Specialists came and went. They ran scans, tests, therapies, but the silence stayed. Ethan didn't talk about Anna. He didn't cry. He worked. Longer hours, colder stares, tighter control over everything except the one thing that mattered most, his daughter. 3 nannies had come. 3 nannies had failed. One suggested he spend more time with Sophie. He fired her the next day. "I give her the best of everything," he snapped. "She doesn't need hugs. She needs structure." But deep down, Ethan knew he wasn't building a life. He was building a prison, and both he and Sophie were trapped inside. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime, and just like that, Elena Carter stepped into a world that was never meant for her. The marble floors gleamed like mirrors. The ceiling stretched higher than her apartment walls ever had. Paintings worth more than her student loans hung like ghosts on the walls. This wasn't a home, it was a monument, and everything inside it whispered, "You don't belong here." She clutched the strap of her old canvas bag tighter. Inside it, a printed resume, a peanut butter sandwich, and a worn-out hairbrush. That was all she had. Across the room, Ethan Blake barely looked up from his phone. Another nanny. Another interruption. Another failure waiting to happen. His eyes scanned her head to toe, calculating, unimpressed. "She looks fragile," he muttered under his breath. But the older woman beside him saw something else entirely. Grace Blake, Ethan's mother, had lived through storms far colder than this. She took one look at Elena and smiled, not out of politeness, but recognition. She saw it in the girl's tired shoulders. The way she stood, as if carrying the weight of someone else's life. "Ethan," Grace said gently, "this is Elena Carter." Ethan gave a curt nod. "Hope you last longer than the last one," he said flatly, turning back to his screen. Elena didn't respond. She just looked around. The penthouse, for all its shine, felt like a mausoleum. Too clean, too silent, too untouched by life. "Come," Grace said, motioning her toward the hallway. "I'll introduce you to Sophie." They walked down a long corridor. past doors that looked expensive but hollow. Then Grace stopped and opened the door to a child's room. It should have been bright. It should have been alive. Instead, it was still, toys untouched, curtains drawn. And in the corner, curled up on a cream-colored rug, was Sophie, a tiny girl with pale skin, tangled hair, and a teddy bear clutched like it was keeping her alive. She didn't move. She didn't blink. Her gray eyes were open, but looking at nothing. "This is Sophie," Grace whispered, her voice cracking slightly. "She hasn't spoken since the accident. She doesn't walk. She barely eats unless I feed her." Elena stepped closer. Not too close, just enough to feel the heaviness in the room settle on her chest. It wasn't just Sophie who had gone silent. The whole house had. No echoes, no warmth, only the hum of an air purifier, and grief so thick it almost had a sound of its own. Elena looked at Sophie, then at the empty corners of the room, and for the first time she understood. She wasn't just facing the silence of a child. She was facing the silence of a broken world. The first few days felt like walking through glass, cold, and one wrong step away from shattering everything. Elena woke up early. She arrived earlier. She tiptoed through the penthouse like an unwanted guest in someone else's dream. Ethan Blake didn't greet her. He didn't thank her. He barely looked at her. But she could feel him always watching, from the corner of the room, from behind his laptop, from the second floor as she walked Sophie to the playroom. His eyes followed her movements like a security camera, not out of curiosity, but control. He didn't trust her. Not with his house, not with his child, not even with a glass of juice. And Sophie, she didn't respond. Not to lullabies, not to stories, not to soft animal puppets dancing across the rug. Elena tried everything. She brought storybooks from the library, sang silly songs she hadn't sung since childhood, wore bright colors to make the room feel less heavy. But Sophie sat in her corner, eyes blank, lips still, teddy bear clenched in her small hands, like a life preserver. No laughter, no eye contact, not even a glance. The silence wasn't just painful, it was humiliating. And still, Elena stayed, because somewhere deep in that silence, she saw herself. It happened on the fourth day. The morning was gray, the air thick with New York humidity. Elena was reading aloud from a picture book, her voice soft, her posture calm, though inside she was unraveling. She didn't expect anything. Not a smile, not a word, not even a blink. But then, Sophie looked at her. Just for a second, not long, but long enough. And in those eyes, gray, quiet, wide, Elena saw something she hadn't seen in a long time. Not fear, not defiance. But a grief so deep, so old, it no longer screamed. It simply sat there, quiet, waiting. It hit Elena like a cold wave, because she'd seen that exact look before in the mirror, after her father's funeral, the morning her mother stopped talking, the night her little brother locked himself in the bathroom and wouldn't come out for hours. That same blankness, that silent scream behind the eyes, the way pain doesn't always shout, it just stares. Sophie wasn't unreachable. She was buried beneath a mountain of loss too heavy for her tiny shoulders. And suddenly, Elena wasn't just the nanny anymore. She was the only person in the room who understood what it meant to survive while feeling like you didn't. It started with a sock puppet, a silly one, 2 buttons for eyes, a red yarn mouth, and a voice Elena made up on the spot. "Hello there," the puppet squeaked. "I'm Mr. Dinosaur. I sneeze when I see pretty girls." Then she let out the most dramatic, ridiculous fake sneeze. "Achoo!" and fell backward like a knocked-over beetle, legs in the air, arms flailing. It was absurd, goofy, utterly undignified. But it worked. Elena heard it. So soft she almost missed it. A laugh. Barely a whisper, but real. She sat up, slowly, unsure if it had been her imagination. Sophie was covering her mouth as if surprised by the sound she had just made. Her gray eyes were wide. And then another giggle, this one slightly louder, still small, but bright enough to split the darkness wide open. Elena didn't say anything. She didn't want to scare it away. She just smiled and let Mr. Dinosaur sneeze again. Outside the playroom door, Ethan stood frozen. He had only meant to walk by, but when he heard that sound he hadn't heard in over a year, he stopped like a man who'd seen a ghost. He didn't move, didn't blink. His heart pounded. He closed his eyes, listening again. There it was, laughter, his daughter's laughter. It echoed like a song from another life. And in that instant, for the first time in forever, Ethan Blake felt hope. It was supposed to be a calm morning. The sun was soft golden through the penthouse windows. Sophie sat on a therapy ball in the center of the playroom, her little arms wrapped tightly around her teddy bear, her feet dangling, but balanced. Elena knelt behind her, steady, gentle, focused. One hand on Sophie's back, the other lightly guiding the motion of the ball. Just a little movement, Elena whispered, like floating on the moon. Sophie didn't speak, but she leaned into the rhythm. Her core muscles engaged, her spine straightened just slightly. Her head didn't fall forward like it used to. It was working. Elena smiled to herself, not out of pride, but because she knew what this meant. Progress. And then the door slammed open. "What the hell are you doing?" Ethan's voice exploded through the room like thunder. Sophie flinched. The ball wobbled. Elena's hands froze midair. Ethan stormed in, eyes wild, breath sharp. "Get her off that thing! Are you insane?" Elena blinked, stunned. "This is a basic therapy method," she said calmly. "I learned it in nursing school. It's safe." "You're not a damn therapist," Ethan snapped. "You're a nanny. And I hired you to watch her not experiment on her." "I'm not experimenting," Elena replied, her voice shaking but firm. "She's making progress. You saw her laugh yesterday." "That was different," Ethan cut in. "This is dangerous. If she falls..." "She's not going to fall." Elena stood up now, still holding Sophie steady. "For the first time in a year, she's moving. That matters." Ethan's fists clenched. He crossed the room, lifted Sophie gently, but abruptly, off the ball. She gasped, gripping his shirt tightly, her teddy bear almost slipping from her hand. Elena stepped back. The air in the room cracked. "I don't want to see this again," Ethan said coldly. "You don't make decisions here." Then he turned and walked out, Sophie in his arms, trembling, eyes wide again. Silent again. The door shut behind them with a thud, and for a long moment, all that remained was the soft creak of the therapy ball slowly settling. And Elena, standing alone, still holding the space where hope had just been. She didn't speak, not one word. As Ethan's footsteps echoed down the hallway as the door clicked shut behind him, Elena stood still, her arms still halfway lifted, her voice trapped in her throat. She didn't argue, didn't defend herself, didn't scream back, even though every part of her wanted to. Instead, a single tear slid down her cheek, then another, not because she was weak, not because she was afraid, but because sometimes humiliation doesn't shout. It leaks out, drop by drop. Sophie had felt it too. The girl, once calm in her gentle rhythm on the ball, had frozen the second her father's voice filled the room. She had recoiled into herself, a turtle retreating into its shell. Her small hands had gripped Ethan's shirt in panic, but her eyes had looked at Elena, not in blame, in fear. It was the fear of something returning. Something she'd hoped was gone, the yelling, the coldness, the loss of safety. Elena saw it, she felt it, and it broke her, because she had come so close, so painfully close to bringing that child back from wherever she'd disappeared to. But one outburst, one flash of anger, and it was like watching a flower close again before it ever had the chance to bloom. Elena sat on the edge of the rug, her hands resting on her lap, her head bowed low. She didn't cry loudly, no sobs, no shaking shoulders, just silent tears falling quietly for the girl who had just been pulled back into silence, and for herself. The kitchen was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels heavier than noise. Elena stood at the sink, her sleeves rolled up, hands moving mechanically as she scrubbed a glass. The water ran, but her thoughts were elsewhere, still in that room, still on Sophie's face as she recoiled. Her shoulders drooped, her back curved, her soul tired. Then she heard footsteps, soft, hesitant, not the usual commanding stride of Ethan Blake. He lingered at the threshold for a moment, watching her in silence. And in that moment, Elena didn't look like a nanny. She looked like someone who'd carried too much for too long. Elena. His voice was rough, almost broken. She jumped slightly, quickly wiping at her eyes before turning around. "I'm sorry," he said. The words fell out like bricks hitting stone, heavy, unpolished, honest. She blinked, not sure if she heard him right. "I didn't mean to speak to you that way," he added, his gaze locked on the floor. "It's just," he paused, then looked up, "I don't know how to be a father." And there it was. Not anger, not arrogance, just a man standing in the ruins of everything he thought he could control. "I lost Anna, and when I lost her, I think I lost every part of me that knew how to feel." He swallowed hard. "I get scared. And when I'm scared, I try to control everything, even the people trying to help." Elena didn't speak, but she didn't need to. Her eyes softened. The silence between them was no longer cold. She reached for a dish towel, dried her hands, and turned fully toward him. "I understand," she said softly, and she meant it, because the man standing before her wasn't the titan of glass towers and harsh orders. He was just a father, lost. It didn't happen all at once. There was no dramatic announcement, no grand gesture, just small things. The first change, Ethan came to dinner. Not late, not in silence, not with his phone glued to his hand. He sat at the same table with Elena and Sophie. The first night he didn't speak much. He just listened to Elena's soft voice as she asked Sophie what shape her carrots looked like, to the rustle of napkins, the clink of spoons, the quiet hum of presents. The next evening, he brought a bottle of orange juice to the table. Elena smiled. It was Sophie's favorite. And he remembered. That was the second change. The third came when the office door stayed open. Ethan used to vanish behind it for hours. Emails, contracts, blueprints, meetings. Now, sometimes, when Sophie was playing, he would wander out, quietly, sit on the rug, pick up a block. "Where does this one go?" he'd ask. He never got it right. Not the first time. Not the second. But Sophie would giggle softly as he kept trying. And Elena, she'd just watch, heart full, saying nothing. Because the biggest changes never come with thunder. They come with someone showing up and staying. It began so gently you could miss it if you weren't watching with your heart. Sophie laughed more now. Not loud or wild, but the soft kind. The kind that slipped out in tiny bursts when Ethan knocked over her block tower for the third time. The kind that lingered when Elena made silly animal sounds during bedtime stories. Then, one night, it happened. Elena was humming a lullaby. The lights were dim, Sophie curled up under a soft blanket teddy bear in her arms. The tune was old, a melody Elena's own mother used to hum when life got too heavy. And just as the final notes drifted into silence, Elena heard it, a sound, faint, breath-like, but undeniably there. Sophie was humming back, just one note, then another. Elena froze, not out of fear, but reverence. It wasn't about pitch, it wasn't about melody, it was about connection. And then, a few days later, something even bigger happened. They were reading on the rug, side by side. Elena pointed to a bunny in the picture book and said, "That's you. See the ears?" Sophie smiled and slowly, quietly lifted her small hand and placed it on Elena's arm. Just like that. Not pulled, not coaxed. Sophie reached out. Elena didn't say a word. She didn't have to, because in that one gesture, Sophie said what 100 therapy sessions never could. "I trust you." The night was quiet. Not the kind of silence that feels empty, but the kind that invites something deeper. Sophie had fallen asleep earlier than usual, her tiny body curled peacefully under her favorite blanket. Elena and Ethan sat in the living room, the soft glow of a side lamp casting long shadows on the floor. Neither of them said much. There was no need. The room, for once, didn't feel cold. It felt still, present. Then Ethan spoke. Not loudly, not suddenly, just enough to break the silence without shattering it. "Anna loved lullabies," he said. His voice was steady, but his eyes weren't. "She used to sing them to Sophie, even when Sophie was still in the womb. I'd come home late and find her standing in the nursery singing to the walls." He gave a faint smile. "I used to think it was silly, that the baby couldn't hear. But now," he trailed off. Elena didn't rush him. She didn't nod. She just listened fully quietly, like someone who knew what silence carried. "I don't talk about her," he continued, "because I'm scared that if I do, I'll come apart." His voice cracked just slightly. "I'm terrified that I already lost Anna, and now I might lose Sophie too, piece by piece." He didn't cry, but his hands clenched into fists on his knees. That's when Elena reached out. No words. No dramatic gesture, just her hand resting gently on his. And somehow, that touch said everything. "I hear you, I see you. You are not alone." And in that moment, Ethan Blake, who built towers, led firms, commanded rooms, sat still and let someone else hold space for his pain. It wasn't a conversation. It was a surrender. Seattle. The word lingered in the room like a question nobody wanted to answer. Elena stood by the kitchen counter holding a folded brochure. Her eyes weren't hopeful. They were steady, quiet, but certain. "I've been reading about a center," she said. "Not experimental, just different. They work with trauma, real trauma, the kind you can't fix with pills or flashcards." Ethan didn't look up from his coffee. He stared into the cup like it held answers, or maybe like he didn't want to hear hers. "We've tried so many places already," he muttered. "You think Seattle has magic?" Elena walked over and placed the brochure on the table. It was worn at the edges. She had read it too many times. "I don't believe in magic," she said, "but I believe in trying again." Silence. Then Ethan laughed, bitter quiet. "What if it fails?" Elena didn't flinch. She simply met his gaze and asked, "But what if it works?" That question hung in the air heavier than any argument. Ethan leaned back, exhaled sharply, and ran a hand through his hair. He looked at the ceiling like he was asking it for permission. "I've already lost so much," he said. "I can't lose her too. Not again." Elena nodded slowly. "Then let's go. For Sophie. Not for me, not for you, for her." And in that moment, something shifted. Not loud, not dramatic, but like the soft crack of ice under sunlight. Ethan Blake, man of control, of numbers and outcomes, was about to choose something terrifying: hope. At the Seattle Center, nothing looked like a hospital. No white walls, no clipboards, no ticking clocks. Instead, gardens, warm wooden halls, music drifting softly from every corner, and animals, real ones, a golden retriever named Charlie, a miniature horse named Dandelion, and Sophie, watching it all in silence. Elena stood nearby as a therapist handed Sophie a tambourine. She didn't speak, but her fingers twitched. She touched it. Clink. Then again. Clink, clink. The rhythm wasn't perfect, but it was hers. Day by day, therapy expanded. Art with her fingers, swimming with floating belts, yoga while holding onto feathers in the wind. One afternoon, a music therapist brought in a guitar and began to hum. Sophie Turing. Elena froze. Sophie wasn't just listening, she was humming back, soft, breathless, but there. That night, Ethan stood by the door, watching his daughter sway gently to a lullaby. She couldn't say daddy yet, but she could feel the beat, and finally, she was part of it. Not just surviving, she was starting to play. The sun that afternoon poured like honey through the glass panels. Sophie sat by the window, her doll in her lap, humming quietly to herself. Alina was by the doorway, talking softly to a nurse, laughing just a little. That's when it happened. No fanfare, no warning, just movement. Sophie placed one foot forward, then the other. Her knees wobbled, her arms trembled, but her eyes, they never left Alina. Not her father, not the therapists, her. Step, step. A pause, then another step. The whole hallway froze. Even the birds seemed to hush. Ethan stood behind the glass, breath stolen from his chest. But Sophie didn't see him. Her world, her strength, was walking in a white cardigan humming lullabies. Elena turned, saw Sophie walking, toward her. Not just walking, choosing. And when she collapsed into Elena's arms, breathless and smiling, it wasn't just a milestone. It was trust. Given freely. For the first time in years. The skyline of New York hadn't changed, but they had. Penthouse 47B, once a cathedral of silence and grief, now echoed with the sound of little feet and laughter. Sophie no longer clung to her silence like armor. Now she ran barefoot across the marble floors, spinning, giggling, shouting, "Elena, look at me, I'm flying!" Ethan watched from the doorway, stunned, not by her words, but by the music in her voice. And for the first time in years, he didn't feel like a stranger in his own home. The glass walls no longer looked out onto emptiness. Now they framed joy. Elena stood in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, hands covered in cookie dough. Sophie circled her like a planet orbiting its sun. This was no longer a house. It was a home. One rebuilt not with money, but with laughter, healing, and the courage to begin again. It wasn't the penthouse. There was no doorman, no city skyline, no private elevator, just a gravel path, a white fence, and a humble cottage tucked at the edge of the woods wrapped in lavender. Alina blinked, unsure. This is... Ethan gave a small, almost shy smile. This is where we begin. Sophie squealed with joy, already chasing butterflies between the blooms. Her laughter echoed like wind chimes. For once, nothing was marble, nothing was gold, but everything felt real. Inside, the furniture creaked, the windows stuck a little, and the floor wasn't perfectly polished. But there was warmth, there was breath, there was life. Ethan walked into the garden, knelt beside a bush in full bloom, and picked a sprig of lavender. He turned to Elena. His voice was low, trembling, almost unsure. "I thought I needed skyscrapers to be a man. Turns out I just needed to kneel and ask the right person to stay." It wasn't during a fancy dinner. No ring hidden in dessert. No fireworks, just a quiet morning after pancakes and spilled syrup as sunlight spilled lazily through the windows of the lavender cottage. Ethan watched Elena laughing barefoot in the kitchen, singing off-key, flipping burnt toast with dramatic flair. Sophie was giggling from the floor, wrapped in a blanket like a burrito. And that was it. The moment. The one that needed no planning, no permission. Ethan walked over slowly. His voice low, unsure, but steady. He knelt one knee on the creaky floor, the other on the heart he once locked away. "Not because I feel I should, not out of obligation, but because you are home." Elena froze, not in shock, but in something deeper, a stillness carved from knowing. She didn't speak. She turned, picked up Sophie, held her close, then looked at Ethan, eyes wet but smiling, and she nodded. No words. Because sometimes love answers not with voices, but with arms that hold tight and hearts that stay. It used to be silent. Not peaceful silence, but the kind that wrapped around your chest and made it hard to breathe. But now it was different. There was laughter in the mornings. Not the loud, chaotic kind, but the warm kind, the kind that sneaks in when no one's paying attention. Sophie, once motionless, now chased butterflies with dirt-streaked fingers. Her giggles echoed through the lavender fields. Ethan knelt in the soil, sleeves rolled up, planting mint beside tomatoes. Every so often, he'd glance back, just to see if she was still laughing. And she always was. Inside, Elena danced around the kitchen barefoot again. The radio played a soft tune from the 70s, something about sunshine. She swayed as she poured juice, humming along off-key. This wasn't a fairy tale. No magic wand. No miracle moment. Just pancakes, slightly burnt. Shoes lost in the garden. Music always too loud. But somehow this was everything they had once thought impossible. A home, a rhythm, a life. On the balcony, they sat together, no words needed. The sky melted into hues of amber and rose, the sun dipping slowly behind the cityscape. Elena held Sophie close, Sophie's small hand in hers. Ethan leaned back, breathing in the quiet. No promises were spoken, no grand declarations. Just 3 hearts, each healing, each whole, each finally home. They had found the missing pieces, not in perfection, but in presence. Not in fairy tales, but in every breath shared, together. Family isn't made by blood. It's made by the people who make you feel safe enough to take the next step. Elena didn't just teach Sophie how to walk. She taught them all how to live again. In the quiet moments, in the small gestures, in the courage to love despite the scars, they found home. And that's the greatest journey of all. This story reminds us that true healing isn't about perfection. It's about patience, trust, and the courage to start again. Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness and understanding can break through the deepest silence and light the way toward hope. Family isn't just who you're born to, it's who chooses to stand by you when life gets hardest. If this story touched your heart, please hit the subscribe button and join our community at Pieces of Soul. Here, we share powerful stories of hope, resilience, and love that remind us all how strong the human spirit can be. Don't forget to like, comment your thoughts, and share with someone who needs to hear this today. Together, let's build a world full of compassion and second chances.